All right, so here we are at table saw 3. So at this point, we've already gone over table saw 1 if you're in advance. We've gone over table saw 2, which that's the one you're mainly going to be using for your cuts wider than 2 inches. But there are many situations where amongst your project, you have some smaller pieces like your table legs or your stretcher pieces on your end table or coffee table. Or for example, your stripes on your wavy American flag or your box top. You have some pieces that are a bit smaller that on the previous table saw, we didn't quite have enough room. Over there was, again, remember there was that big blade guard, that big clear kind of guard, and there wasn't enough room on some skinny cuts to push the push stick on through with that. And that happens once in a while where we need to make some of those cuts. So we have this table saw over here all kind of specifically set up kind of for that there. So you will use table saw 3. You'll use table saw 3 when you're either making big cuts or small cuts. You'll use it when you're making small rips or you're making big cross cuts. So again, a rip is when you're cutting with the grain. A cross cut is when you're cutting across the grain. As you know, we could use the miter saw right behind us here for some cross cuts, but there are times where we have some really big pieces that we don't quite have that kind of depth on that miter saw to make that happen. When we need to kind of get those cuts made as square as possible and as straight as possible. So this is an amazing setup here. You can cut some really big pieces. You can cut a full sheet of plywood, which is 4 foot by 8 foot on this thing here. It's super handy. There are so many really cool features that we can utilize for our classes together. When you are utilizing this system, you're not really adjusting much. The only thing you are adjusting on this whole setup here, you can, if you wish, you can adjust this stop block here, all right? Or if you're not using it, if you're just making like a one-off cut, you'll just flop that out of the way. Then you have that clean reference point there to then put your workpiece up against. If I accidentally leave that down, I'm not going to be square and flat on our sliding miter gauge table here. And then at that point, I'm not cutting 90 degrees. I might be cutting, instead of perfectly straight here, I might be cutting, on an angle because this isn't referenced perfectly 90 degrees here to there if I have that stop block. So that's extremely important to have that up out of the way. If you're not using it, then you can reference that there. You'll feed the direction of that sliding table with your right hand. Your left hand, you will be holding your board straight back. Try not to be holding it on an angle because then you could be pulling that board left or right. And we want that board to be tracking right straight through there. We wax up our tables so they stay nice and the board glides really nice on there. So it could happen if you're not holding kind of straight back that board slides left and right. And we want to aim to make as straight of a cut kind of as possible there. All right, so I have my stop block out of the way. I'm just making a one-off cut right now. I have that brought back. And this is a chunk of plywood. So the end, it's not a glued up item. But let's say, for example, this is already cut too. But let's say I have this plaque here that I have a glue seam right there. When I glue it up, as you know, it's impossible to have this end perfectly straight. One end is going to be a bit off or a bit angled. It's not going to be perfectly straight like that. So you will need to square up that one end. You'll make a trim cut. When you're making a trim cut, you're just trying to take off as little as possible. So with the blade off, you'll bring it on up. You're going to eye down at here. But again, just like table saw 2, you're standing off to the left. You're eyeing down this here, but you're standing off to the left. And you're going to line it up, again, with the blade off to where you're taking off just a tiny bit of material. You're going to line it up. You're going to bring it back out of that red zone there. Then you can turn it on, which again is right here. You can turn it on, It'll reach full speed very quickly. You can use your right hand on the sliding table, left hand holding down and back on that board, keeping it put right on through, and then you can go right on through. When you finish that cut, this is very, very, very important. I do not want you to go straight on through and then straight on back, because we'll zoom into the blade here. Because again, that blade direction, that blade is spinning right, it's coming back towards us. So if we, while that blade is still spinning, if we come back and we accidentally, I mentioned how nice and smooth this table is. If we accidentally move that way here, once we're beyond that riving knife, nothing's stopping your board from going that way. And if the board went that way and touched that blade, you have the potential, if you're not holding on to it strong, if you're not ready for it and anticipating that, it can come back at a high rate of speed, which you're not kind of prepared for. All right, so when you finish your cut, you're gonna go through, over, and back, or you're gonna go through, hold on to it still with both your hands, shut it off with one of your legs there. Then when it comes to a complete stop, then you can come kind of straight back. But don't go here with that blade rotating, of course, and then while it's still rotating, don't come right back. Either go out, over, and back, or out, let it stop, and back. I like to avoid you guys picking this up and carrying it back. I should share a video with you. There's a classic video where somebody picks it up, then on the way back they accidentally drop it. It touches the blade, and then this piece is kind of coming on back as well. During these safety demos, it might sound like there's a bunch of things that can go wrong, and there kind of is, but we talk about all these things to avoid these situations. Doing all the little things right, thinking through your processes, kind of seeing the next step kind of in your mind or before you start can absolutely help limit a lot of those situations. All right, so that's kind of the main part on the sliding table. There are tons of features on here that we can utilize with angles, with things like that. One feature that you might utilize, I referenced the stop block. We could use this when we're cutting a lot of pieces. Similar to the stop block on the miter saw, we use this to make our repeated cuts. Say we're making a bunch of like 8x10 plaques. They're all the same length there for our cross cut. I can set that up like so, where I push this in line with the blade. Obviously it's off. I can use my tape measure or a ruler and go on over to the blade. I can bring this on down. I can loosen this on up, and looking down here, I can move this left and right and lock it in to my measurement. It's pretty important that you'll make your first cut, you'll shut it off, you'll measure that piece to verify that it's your desired size. Hopefully if it's not, it's on the bigger side, so you can trim that down and adjust that stop block to that minor kind of point to dial those in. But it's super handy. It flips up like you guys have seen prior. So then if you're squaring up one side and then trimming the other, you don't have to move this all the time. If you want to trim this here, you can just flop this up. Because the board will be longer, it would have been in the way. You can make your trim cut. You can come over, back, turn it around, put that stop block back down. Then you can reference that there. Then you can go on through making your cut there. When you are using the stop block, I had mentioned after the cut, I want you to go left or let it stop. This situation where we can't go left because this is bound here. So in this situation, when you're using a stop block, you're going to reference it, of course, and reference it softly. Don't bang the heck out of it. You don't want to accidentally bump that out of alignment. You want the first board and the last board all be the exact same. That's the whole purpose we're using this stop block system here. So lightly reference it, make your cut, but at this point, I want you to utilize that handy off button location with your knee and let it stop. Then once it's stopped, you can either slide it over, bring it back, pick it up, or bring it straight back, either way. But with that stop block there, I definitely don't want you going front and back because of that obvious kind of kickback situation there. All right. Again, if we're not utilizing this, feel free to loosen that up and slide it on down and snug it back up. Make sure you snug it back up though, because I don't want this to be loose and all fall apart as well through all the vibrations. Or you can simply just flip it up, then it's out of your way. You have a good clean reference point that you can put your material on and kind of reference there. All right, so that's the sliding table part, that big miter gauge. The other part, like it's just kind of review from table saw 2. It's the same operation except for you have an exposed blade. And again, the whole reason we have this exposed blade instead of having that whole cover there is so that we have room to make some small little tiny cuts. And actually you can see it kind of there, where sometimes we actually cut the push stick when we are making some really skinny cuts to make some really high detailed kind of parts in our projects. It's possible to be making, really small pieces, and when you push that push stick right on through, this actually gets cut. That is absolutely okay. We have tons of these guys here. With that being said, prior to making your cut, inspect your push stick. If that bottom part there is pretty flimsy, if you're not very confident that it's going to be able to maintain forward momentum throughout that process, grab a new one. Don't even ask me, just toss it in the scrap bin, go grab a new one out of our filing cabinet, and you're all locked in and ready to go on your next cut there. All right. But again, just like table saw 2, this is majority review from the prior table saw that we went through. You have your fence all set, you have your blade height all set, where you're a 1/4 inch kind of above. Again, right here, you're adjusting the blade guard like so, or the blade height like so, and you're getting that all dialed in there. Again, you have the fence all set. Utilize the feather boards when you can. They're right here on the front. You can put that, where you need to. Again, the front of that feather board, I want that right in line with that red miter gate, or that red throat plate there. So then you have room to, behind it, hold the material down, because we don't have the hold downs on this here, because we're typically making skinny rips. And again, we can't have that hold down wheel there when we're making cuts less than 4 inches. So that's kind of out of the window. So that's why I say it's really important to still have that left hand on there and that thumb holding your workpiece down and your finger pushing that piece up against the fence. Again, it's easier to see on this one because the blade guard isn't there. When you push that board on through, have that push stick on a slight angle, drive it right on through, right on through, right on through, to where the end of that board is past that red throat plate there. All right, of course, you always have the side that you jointed up against the fence. For my quick example, I just grabbed it and tossed it in there. But when you're ripping a piece, you have that jointed side up against the fence, so you have a good reference point to roll on through. Have somebody catch, or you walk around to move all your pieces following the cut, all the things that we've been talking about kind of on prior saws. All right, when you're done, again, toss this on the front, leave that push stick nice and handy for the next person, kind of right there, and you're all ready to go. Your small offcuts that cut off here, toss that in the scrap bin, whether it be right there or over in the miter saw area, so we can keep this area nice and clean, even though right now it doesn't quite look like it. So we have the good clean area to make our cuts for future references. All right, so again, table saw 3, skinny rips less than 2 inches, or big wide cross cuts. When we're not using the miter gauge, we'll have that all the way back, and there's plenty of room to still stand in here to make your cut there. If for whatever reason you have a super long board where it's less than 2 inches, but it happens to be so long that it's hitting this location here, come grab me. I will gladly move that for you, but I want to make sure it gets put back right in the perfect location where the end of this sliding table is right on this cast iron to red throat plate area. If that's too close, as you guys know, we have saw stops to where if metal or your fingers or things like that touch that blade, it's going to stop that blade entirely. And that's, obviously you can't see it that far away in the video. There's a tiny little nick right about there where somebody had it set up wrong, hit it, and it's a very distinct click, and you're not seeing any of the blades. So that's an unfortunate situation there. So I want to make sure that this is all set up proper to where when you're focused on holding the material back and feeding on through, you don't have to worry about the location of that because you've already gone through kind of checking that prior to your cut. All right, table saw 3.